Meeting live.
Excellent, good. So, Andy, apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Linda Cohen and from Charlotte Blanche and from Lynn Green.
Right, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. I guess I'm a prospective foster carer with GCC. Is there anybody else? I still have to say the word prospective at the moment. Nobody else? Oh, Becky.
You can maybe guide me whether I'm meant to declare it, but I'm a mentor with Breathe.
Yeah, probably not necessary.
But I'll pop it on there anyway. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah. Is that pecuniary or not? Is that remunerated, Becky? No, it's not. So it's less important. The point of fostering is it's remunerated, so it's a declarable pecuniary interest. Nick.
Yeah, Andrew, obviously I run an alternative provision programme working with young people in the county, so that is an interest.
Right. Yeah, that's a DPI. Brilliant. Okay. So, Chris, it's very much about you and your response to the Ofsted report.
Good morning, everyone. So, Andrew, I suppose my first question is, what would be of most benefit for members, just to guide me how you want to use the time? I've got Anne and Kirsten here as well, who can answer detailed questions about aspects of the report
that
relate to their lead areas. I can do a brief overview if you like, and then get into questions, but I gave you a kind of verbal update last time we met. But
yeah. Actually, Chris, I wonder if I can just make a few opening remarks before we go on to that. So I think what I should say is, clearly we all know that we've moved from a position where the GCC was inadequate to the position where we require improvement to be good, which is a fantastic undertaking, given the previous condition of GCC. And I think in Chris's and perhaps other people's opinion, the service has actually deteriorated since when he arrived, since the original Ofsted inspection. So I think, Chris, we should start off by giving you and your team and your former team members some thanks and congratulations for the work that you've achieved. I think it's probably also appropriate to mention some of the other people who have been involved. Obviously, Stephen Davis, who's not on the call at the moment, has played a part in that. But also his predecessor as cabinet member for Children's Services, Richard Boyles, who held that position for 4 years from 2017 to 2021, put a huge amount of effort. Now, he is obviously not a member of the authority anymore, but I think it's important to recognise the important part that he played. And obviously there are other councillors as well. So from the scrutiny side, obviously we've got Ben, the vice chair this time, and in the last term of this council, it was obviously Leslie Williams, who's also obviously not on the authority anymore. And I think it has been, it's been a journey that we've been on, and I think it's one which hasn't been unduly politicised, and I think that's a credit, I think, really to all concerned. So I think it's important to set that out at the start of this meeting, because there's a huge number of people who've really gone over and beyond to get us to the position where we're in what I regard as a very solid RI performance from Ofsted. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Chris?
No, I don't think so. I'll just do a brief introduction of the report then.
Yeah.
And then that no doubt will generate the questions that members of the board would like us to address.
Sure.
So, forgive me if you've heard this before. In many ways, I think the whole world's moved on, and this seems like a bit of history to us in children's services now, because we seem to have moved on to the next big challenge, which is provision for children with special educational needs, the budget, and a number of transformation to services to modernise them, to make us even more efficient. However, it's only just been published at the end of March, so it's still relatively new to some, but for us it seems a little bit of history now. But it took place then on the 7th of February to the 18th of February. It's actually a 3-week process. We get a week's notice and we have a week to collate a whole range of information that they require, and it's quite an industry to get that information together. We were commended by Ofsted on how slick we were actually in managing the process and getting that data to them. We did a lot of preparation beforehand. We had an ops room in place, and it all went very, very well. And I think they were quite impressed with that, because we were able to produce information that they asked for really within 12 hours of having asked for it, which is quite impressive. So the outcome overall was that we were a service that requires improvement to be good, as Andrew says. Now that means we're not yet good, and we have to hang on to that. And we still have some distance to go before we can confidently say that we're a good service. There were 4 judgments, as you'll see at the top of the report: the impact of leaders on the social work practice, the experiences of young people and the progress that they make, that's those that need help and protection, the experiences and progress of children in care and care leavers, and the overall effectiveness, all of which requires improvement to be good. Now, I will tell you that we were only a whisker away from getting a good for the impact of leaders on social work practice. We have within our team somebody called Simon Russell, who has led ILAC inspections of local authorities' children's services. And we have a daily keeping in touch meeting with Ofsted. And so I get formative feedback on a day-to-day basis of what they found the day before when they're on site. And the feedback that we were getting was very positive on a day-to-day basis. And Simon said, you know what, they must be thinking about a good for leadership. And it may well be worth making a pitch for that. So I did. I actually met with the regional director and the QA lead and the lead inspector and set out our case for leadership of the service, which was based upon distance travelled, i.e. where we were 4 years ago when I arrived, or even further 5 years ago when we were inspected. But the history of Gloucestershire is interesting, because if you read the 2017 report, we were in a very dark place in that time period. But there was a year before I arrived in March 2018 and begun to assemble the current senior leadership team. So there had been a drift for about a year, and the situation had deteriorated quite considerably since 2017. So in essence, the situation I inherited was inherently worse than the inspection report reflected in 2017, and that was pretty dire. So that, I think, was one of the bases for arguing that we've actually travelled an awful long way. The fact that we'd invested in the service considerably, that there was good corporate and political buy-in, and it wasn't a service that was subjected to as a kind of political football between the different parties. There was a collective approach to an endeavour of improving children's services, which was heard and received, and I think the other aspect that added weight to the argument was that we've made this improvement, which is, in terms of distance travelled, although it hadn't yet reached good, was a long and significant distance, and we'd done it at a time of a international pandemic. So the improvements and strides that we'd made had been made during a time of additional challenges, and so that was recognised in the report. It requires requires improvement to be good. So the outcome of my presentation. It's that they didn't change their judgment. What they did say is that they would sleep on it and think about it, come back the next day and let me know. And what they did say was that they thought we were just falling short of a good, and that they didn't think it would be right for them to give a good for that particular judgment based on the criteria having just been missed. They didn't want to submit a draft with a good and then to have it knocked back by their consistency or QA processes. The reason I'm telling you this story is that we missed it by a whisker, which is disappointing. And I think had they have come last summer, when we were hoping they were coming, we may even have done better, because at that point we were flying, we had 20% agency, and the service was in a more stable position than it is now, actually. We've got a greater proportion of agency now because of market conditions, and that does affect our improvement journey, and particularly the rate of improvement. So I think that's important for you to know. The other things that I think are absolutely relevant as a kind of backdrop is that I've said already that the progress that inspectors referred to was significant. Although we're still a service that aren't yet good, we're fast approaching that line, and we've come from a very long way back. So that distance travelled was acknowledged, as was the financial investment, and probably more important than anything else is that sentence at the bottom of the first paragraph on page 1, which was, children are no longer left in situations where they are known to be at immediate risk of significant harm. That is a significant and important sentence for you as members to read and to assimilate. In 2017, children were left in circumstances where they were at risk. That is no longer the case in Gloucestershire, and we should celebrate that. During the course of the inspection, they raised 17 cases with us where they had some concerns about the management and oversight of the case. 6 of those they asked for a written response from us, and they accepted our response in all 6 cases. And in fact, in all 17, despite the fact that they didn't want a written account, we gave them one because we produced it very quickly. And some of those cases where they wanted a written account were quite low-level concerns as well. And although they're important, and I don't want to diminish the importance of them, just to give you an example, there were 2 of those 6 cases they asked for a written account were in relation to private fostering arrangements, and the fact that we'd used the incorrect administrative procedure. Children were safe, they were well placed, they were thriving, but we'd used the wrong procedure, which is not unimportant, but it's not as important as if the children weren't well placed or if they weren't thriving. So you know, that's pretty business critical now, that we can take comfort from the fact that children aren't left in circumstances where they're at risk. And that wasn't the case in 2017. They made another of other very constructive comments around QA and performance management systems. I've said before that Ofsted now believe that we're an authority that knows ourselves well. We know our strengths, we know our weaknesses, and we have compelling plans in place to address those weaknesses where they exist. We intervene in an effective and timely way with children where they are referred to us, and we've got now a clear model of practice that's evolving. Still to be established, but it is evolving. So on page 2, their summary, if you like, of what still needs to improve and why we're not yet good, they summarise as the timeliness and application of consistent thresholds for child protection, the suitability of accommodation for care leavers, which, to be honest, that was the one I was most disappointed with, because when they'd been to Gloucestershire for previous monitoring visits, they looked specifically at care leavers, and one of the aspects of the service that they looked at and reviewed was accommodation, and they didn't then raise that as an issue. And I know that during the inspection they spoke to a couple of young people, one of whom felt they were unsafe in their existing accommodation. It was unbeknown to us at the time. And so I think that recommendation was built upon quite a small sample and maybe only that one comment. But I would say that it's one of those areas that I'm never satisfied with. You know, if I look at some of the accommodation that our young people are in, I would have to be honest and say that I wouldn't be happy if it were my son or daughter. And these are our corporate sons and daughters. So the same, if you like, measures should apply and standards in judging the suitability of that accommodation. So that's something we will need to keep an eye on. But as I say, that was the one that I was probably most disappointed with. The quality of case supervision and management is still too variable. We accept that. Timeliness with which personal advisors are allocated to children to best support their transition to adulthood. Again, that was raised as an issue. And I suppose the higher you go up the age scale in terms of the children that we care for, the greater the legacy and the impact of that legacy on that particular young person. If they were a child in care when they were 10 years of age and they're now 18, that would have been at a time they would have come into care if you like it, at a low point in terms of the quality of the service being offered. And so there's a legacy impact on that. So there's some clear improvements to be made with the leave and care service. And then lastly, how well IT systems support social workers to do their job. That won't come as a surprise to you. The IT system is something that I and others have been expressing concerns about for a long time. It is improving, but the progress and rate of that improvement is pretty slow. It's a very aged infrastructure. It doesn't support new software systems effectively. And our own ICS system runs in a very clunky way on top of that old infrastructure. And it's a constant source of frustration for our frontline social workers. And they made that known to inspectors when inspectors visited them on the front line. They were very positive about our social workers. They said they knew their case, their young people well. They were committed and thorough in the work that they do. They saw some outstanding practice but in many cases it's still too variable. But real compliments about our workforce. Some very positive compliments about what it feels like to be a social worker in Gloucestershire. People feel supported, held, well trained and developed. They have good opportunities for career progression. They appreciate the Social Work Academy and the efforts that we're making to keep the workforce resupplied. So I think those were the kind of main advantages and strengths that they identified. The reason we're not yet good is because it's still too variable. Now, I'll just finish by saying this, and that is that they didn't find, as I say, any child that was left in unsafe circumstances. They found a little bit of inadequate practice, but in terms of 2017, the whole kind of quality of practice has shifted from the inadequate towards the outstanding. It's not all good, it's not all outstanding, but the quality of practice has shifted to the right if you look at that continuum from left to right, left being inadequate, right being outstanding. So it's a real positive trajectory and direction of travel. The narrative itself, when you read the report, seems incredibly positive for a service that still requires improvement to be good. And in fact, in my last authority, which was Harrow, we managed to get a good overall. And the narrative didn't read as well as this narrative, actually, which is, strange in many ways. But look, we assessed, didn't we? And I've said this many times to you and your predecessors at CFOSC that it would take 2 to 3 years to turn this service around and get it to requires improvement to be good. In other words, to get it out of intervention. Now, we're 4 years on since my arrival, but you couldn't have done it any sooner because we weren't inspected any sooner. So we've done it as soon as we have been inspected, and it's been a positive outcome, which reaffirms the strategy more broadly, which reaffirms the direction of travel that we're moving in. I also said 4 years ago that once we get to requires improvement to be good, it will take another couple of years to get to good. And while I'm really pleased with the outcome that, we said on day one to the inspectors, this is what you will find. And on day 21, they said, yep, you're right. We found what you said that we would find. That still means that there are some children and young people in this authority that aren't yet getting a good service. So we must keep focused. We mustn't let history repeat itself. And we mustn't forget that we've been here before as a local authority. I looked at the Ofsted archives in prep for this meeting, and you have to go back to about 2005 to find a report that's anything like as positive as this. And that was under a much weaker framework, where the bar was much lower. So we have come a long way in the last 4 years. And this is our springboard to ensure that this progress is sustainable. We must not let, as famous philosopher says, those that forget history are deemed to repeat it. So we mustn't let Gloucestershire slip back into inadequacy. We've got to keep this journey moving, and it's got to keep moving in the right direction towards good. So really pleased, great outcome, but still work to do. That's my summary. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chris. I should have actually, in the thanks and acknowledgement, say that Ofsted also thanked the foster parents who worked with them on the Ofsted report, and I suppose we shouldn't forget the ambassadors as well, who've played an important part in our improvement journey as well. So Becca and Barley, thank you very much for you and all the other ambassadors as well, who've helped us on the journey, because you have fed back and you have helped Chris, and you have helped our understanding on the scrutiny committee. So a thank you to you. I'd like to open up for questions now. I may need assistance from Andy in spotting this out. I've got David Drew. I'm looking around for any other hands. I've got Becky, so I'll take them in this order. David, Becky. If there's anybody else, wave a bit more. No, okay, David and Becky. David.
Okay, well done, Chris. Good summary. Agree with what you have to say, and you know, in a number of areas, clearly there's marked improvement. I mean, I'd start from the perspective of having now reread the 2017 report, all 41 pages of it, to now have a 12-page report. It does seem quite, you know, and the 41-page report was littered with numbers. There were no numbers in the 12 pages that we've now got, which I find not that helpful of trying to drill down. I also look at the relationship between the monitoring reports, which again I've read, and the final report. And whether it's because you've got different people coming at different times, I don't know how you try and dissect, Chris, some of the comments that they make. I mean, certain things seem to appear, then they just disappear. Now, I accept that the 4 issues they've identified are the ones that we need to certainly show and demonstrate that there is room for improvement, and there will be ways in which we can do that. But I just wonder, how helpful you find this report. It's helpful in the sense it's much more positive than what we've had in the past. But I don't know if Ofsted's having to do a much less detailed analysis because of COVID and the rest of it. But I would have liked to have seen, as you say, you've mentioned cases. There's no mention of those cases at all. I don't know, is that standard practice now, that they're very wary about going into individual issues that come from cases? They may discuss it with you, but as an outsider, how would I know unless you tell me?
Yeah, so I guess the number of pages is kind of related to the proportion of concern that Ofsted might feel about what they see and what they need to report on. I'd like to think that anyway, but that's not strictly true, because in 2017 there was a different framework and they had to report in a different way that probably required greater specificity. I don't know, but clearly what I can reassure you on is that inspectors are no fools. And I know you know that anyway, they are very good at what they do. They are very practiced at homing in on issues. They tend to use that first week and that whole raft of information that we send them to do a desktop analysis, and they come into the authority with some key lines of inquiry. In other words, they've done their research and they want to check out what they think is good or what they're not sure is good, or more importantly, what they think is weak and in need of improvement. And really the 2 weeks they spend in the field or with us in the authority is an opportunity for us to challenge that key line of inquiry or perceived weakness by producing evidence to the contrary. Or accepting it. And we did both. There are some key lines of inquiry where they felt, we were weak and we challenged them in situ. And there are some where they came in and they thought we were weak and we said, yeah, we agree with you, or we need to improve that, to put it more accurately. I don't think they used the term weak, but requires improvement. So I think we should be reassured, because basically the report reflects our own self-assessment, and the report should be read in terms or alongside our self-assessment, because our self-assessment does include lots of data, and they would have researched that in a very, very forensic way. So I think I felt reassured, and my advice and suggestion to you would be that, you know, you should feel reassured as well, because they're very good at what they do. They're very forensic, and it is evidence-based. They look at what's in the child's file. There's no room for me to kind of charm them with my patter or narrative about how well we're doing. You know, it's all about what's in the child's file. And did you want to come in on that? Or were you not waving a finger for a different matter?
I think I was randomly waving my finger, but I guess just to reinforce what you're saying, though, just to remember, this full inspection is part of an inspection framework, so a system within which we're subjecting children's services to inspection activity on an annual basis. So this is one element of annually we'll get either a focused visit, so a deep dive into one section of our system, or a joint and targeted area inspection, which looks at our delivery alongside our partners in terms of child protection and an aspect of it. We also produce a very detailed self-evaluation of social work practice on an annual basis, which is shared with inspectors. That's part of our inspection regime. And we're subject to an annual conversation in which we speak to and give account of that and talk about our development plans. However, the full inspection is the kind of overarching look into our services. And I've been on the other end of this a few times now, and I guess I would want to assure people that it is an absolutely forensic look into the experiences for children, and inspectors rapidly drill into children's records once they get there to test against what the data, which has been analysed from child level and then aggregated to create those key lines of inquiry, whether they then can see that or dismiss those lines of inquiry. And it's the kind of overview of that you get then into the report. So I guess, my view, certainly as a director of safeguarding and care, is that this is a much more rigorous framework than we had in 2017. It is also true that Ofsted have tried to be more strengths focused in the way in which they frame the challenge before us and the recommendations. And that's absolutely responding to challenge from the sector that the inspection regime should be about catching us before we fall and helping us on our improvement journey. You might have read stuff in the past. Birmingham was particularly pertinent about where very, very negative reports don't help you to retain, recruit and develop your staff and to develop your practice system.
Do you want to continue, Chris?
No, I think we can move on to the next question if David is satisfied with that.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Becky.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really amazed and think the amount of work that's gone on since 2017 that seems to be enormous, and I just want to add my thanks to that, to everyone that's done all that work. I'm a Johnny come lately and just seen the last few months of it, really. So I guess I'd like to acknowledge what's gone before and the huge work that's got us here, but start to look forward and use this report to know where to put our focus, if you like, at least for a while. Obviously, it won't be a guide for too long. So with that in mind, I kind of skipped through and just picked out 6, 7, 8 areas from the what needs to improve from the report, and I just thought that might be quite useful. Sorry, that's the bread coming out of the oven. I thought that was maybe just quite a useful place to start to look at areas that the inspectors have picked up, and I'm sure you're doing that anyway. But as a scrutiny committee, that might be a place for us to start. I know we've already got a work plan, but I think part of what we're trying to do here is look at other areas that we might need to add to that work plan. I think the one that I'd just like to highlight at the moment is host families for foreign students was sort of highlighted, and I don't know, but is that the same sort of team of social workers that's going to be looking at hosting Ukrainians, and is that a team that needs immediate sort of boosting? That's another whole layer of work that's going to have to happen suddenly. And I'm just wondering how you're preparing for that, because that was an area that needed improvement. There you go, I think.
Okay, so I'll kick off and then I'll pass over to Anne. So you will know that we have an accelerated improvement plan, which is very focused on improving practice within children's social care and a little more broadly in areas that overlap with Kirsten's remit as well in education. That accelerated improvement plan is what got us to where we are now. You know, it's played a very important part in focusing our minds, and that doesn't need to change, but it needs to evolve in the light of the findings of this inspection. And in fact, what we have to do is to produce a action plan to address the findings of the report within 70 days of receiving it. And Anne is leading on that. And what will happen now going forward is that we'll incorporate those aspects of the accelerated improvement plan that got us through inspection and supplement that plan by what's been found as part of this inspection process, and produce a new plan which we'll call something else. We're not quite certain yet, but it will be, you know, we'll rebrand it perhaps as a continuous improvement plan for children's services, as opposed to an accelerated improvement plan. You know, we want to rebrand it so it's not about just a continuation of same old, but to refresh it. But as I said, we mustn't lose the value of what we've been doing to get us to where we are, because we still need to focus on that. We just need to refocus and refresh that plan and rebrand it as something a bit more different to reflect the more positive position that we find ourselves in. We also need to do that because although we're out of intervention, we're not yet good. So we are still an authority that is in a DFE category or Ofsted category, I don't know which, known as support and supervision. So we're an authority under support and supervision with the DFE. We're not inadequate, but that is it is a level of scrutiny that DFE want to maintain to ensure themselves that we don't slip back. And they do that for 12 months. So we're still in the spotlight for that particular work. But Anne, did you want to say something about the very specific issue of foreign students or Ukrainian families?
Yeah, really happy to. Let me just start with it's paragraph 20 that references students with host families, and that is about private fostering, and Chris referenced that in his introduction. And actually what the inspection report tells us is that for children who are privately fostered, and that is children that the local authority are not placing outside of their family, there's another arrangement, and but when that goes beyond 28 days, that's considered private fostering, and there are a set of regulations that require us to visit and ensure that those situations are safe and suitable for the child. we've got very clear arrangements. However, for a couple of other children, because you'll appreciate, I'm sure Scrutiny members are aware, you know, I could make an arrangement about my 14-year-old to go and live with my friend, and that would be private fostering. If I also have a social worker, sometimes that will be intervention by the local authority. Should be a child becoming a child in care into a connected care arrangement, and sometimes that's not. And that's a kind of matter of both regulation and professional judgment. And that was where we were. It was in those couple of areas that we were challenged. So the child's fine, living with suitable adults, but have you got the right element of the legislation in place? And so we'll undertake monitoring of quality assurance. We're also being asked to. I've got terrible feedback. I don't know if other people could perhaps put themselves on mute. The other bit that we're being asked to look at is our management oversight of that, and you'll see that there is a recommendation about improving supervision and management oversight. So we are looking at the resources that we've got around that. We're looking at that within our remodelling approach. We certainly don't see this as a kind of shopping trip to build our resources. We're going to, you know, we're looking at where we've got pressures and where we can adapt and amend, but there may be a resource request within that. And as you say, we've now got the situation around Ukrainian families. And it is, we are still working out exactly where and how and what is proportionate with those host families that have children in. And sometimes we've seen our first two arrive children without adults, which isn't what should be happening, but of use of language of deluck, of slipped through the net, to work out, is that a family arrangement? Is that private fostering? Is that, you know, do we need to be notifying the Ukrainian embassy and taking those children into care? But it certainly does fall as a pressure into the fostering element of that service as well for the children, actually, if they then need a social worker into our area-based social work services. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Yes, yeah, thank you. I just kind of flagging the Ukrainian situation as one that's adding pressure to the system. Just one other brief thing the report made me think of is that it would be useful to have, for me, an overview of what teams there are within social service. I know there are lots of teams, but actually I don't know what those teams are, and I don't know if it's possible to have a kind of some sort of flow chart or something like that of what the teams are, what they're called. Are they based on what they do or where they are, or they're both, that sort of thing?
You won't be surprised to know that we have to produce exactly that for our Ofsted colleagues, and a short description of what each element of the service does. So we could certainly provide that to Scrutiny members. That wouldn't be any problem at all.
Right, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Chris, do you have anything more you want to say?
No, thank you, Andrew. I think that covers it.
Okay, so the next question is from Mark. I don't have any other hands showing, but I do have questions of my own. So over to you, Mark. Mark, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Mark.
Right. I apologise for my late arrival. I'd saved the link, but it appeared I'd saved the link for a completely different meeting. Anyway, I found it in the end. I've got three questions. Firstly, I'd like to echo Becky's comments. I mean, an amazing report, bearing in mind where you came from, and it's all credit to everybody within the team without sort of naming individuals. Just picking up on Becky's point about Ukrainians, I was at Stowe Town annual meeting last night, and somebody came up to me and said that they had the apartment next door to him was shortly going to be occupied by a Ukrainian family, and he was in a real pickle about what if they knock on the door and ask him a question, where's the shop, or where's the doctor, or I need a taxi or something, because then I don't speak Ukrainian. What is the service do about language skills when we're dealing with people who don't speak English? That's question one. Question two, Chris, you mentioned that it's very forensically investigated, the report by Ofsted. Are you able to say what proportion of files are inspected for the inspectors to come to their conclusions? I mean, are they just picked randomly, or do they actually troll right the way through? And finally, I presume that the full report is shared with all officers involved in the service, and I presume that you will have sort of group and probably smaller meetings to discuss the topics raised and the recommendations made with the team at large, rather than just at management level. That's it from me.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for those positive comments. I'll make sure that those and others expressed by committee members are passed on to staff. I always do. It's always something that gives them a real boost and increases morale. If I stay with the theme of Ofsted for the time being, so look at question 2 to start with. There are a number of lists of children that we have to provide to Ofsted. They randomly select from those lists the cases that they want to take a close look at. And they would usually as well during their time, so they start with a random list of 12, and they look at those cases very closely in order to try and substantiate some of their key lines of inquiry or otherwise. They also, during their time in the field, develop other key lines of inquiry or areas for investigation, and they may ask for other lists of children from whom they will randomly select cases to review. And that might be in relation to any aspect of practice, whether that be accommodation of care leavers, attendance at STRAP meetings, that kind of thing. It could be any aspect of our practice that they ask to have lists of children from which they select a random sample. So we have very little control over what they look at. However, what we can do, if they have an emerging key line of inquiry, or they select 2 cases, and there's always some cases, aren't there, where you kind of think, oh, I wish they hadn't have selected those 2, I wish they'd have selected the other 2. So we can, if we think they've selected 2 cases which aren't reflective of our practice, we can suggest that they look at others where we think practice is better. And they sometimes will do that. And this inspection team, I think, were probably more than any other willing to do that. There are some teams, in my experience in the past, whereby they may have come to a conclusion on the basis of 2 or 3 files, and despite the fact that you offer them another half dozen which would refute their key line of inquiry, they won't look at them. But this particular team, I think, were open to a suggestion that they look at other files. And it's probably related to what Anne said about this framework being a little bit more strengths-based and positively focused. Doesn't mean to say it's weaker. In fact, it's, you're getting a better, more accurate, more forensic assessment of what practice is like. So those files are looked at. They also have a right to roam. So when they're talking to social workers about tracked cases or cases that they'd asked to see specifically, they can say, if it's a case which is very good, they can say, show us a case where you think your practice hasn't been as good, or vice versa. If they're looking at a case where they think there's a weakness, they will sometimes say, okay, so I think this is a weakness, but can you show me some similar cases where the issues are the same, where you think your practice is stronger? So that, and again, they were open to that. And we almost, I suppose, proactively encouraged our staff. We had, as I said, a very slick operation in place. So we briefed our staff that were being seen by social workers and made it clear to them that if they select a case where practice is poor, be sure that you're to be on the front foot with a couple of cases where practice is better. And make sure if you put it forward as a case which is better practice, that it is actually better. You know, check it out with your manager before you do it. So they look at, I guess in the course, you might know the answer to this, Anne, but if you include the tracked cases, the children that they ask for, which they select from random lists, plus the right to roam, they probably look at somewhere in the region of about 200 files in the course of a couple of weeks when they're in the field. But I don't know the exact number. Some will be more forensic than others, but that's in total about the number of cases I guess they might have scrutinised across the team.
Could I ask then what percentage you think that might be of your total caseload?
Well, if you add all the children in need, all the children in care, all those with a CP plan and known to early help, you're looking at something in the region of excess of 5,000 families that we're working with.
Wow. That puts it in perspective. Just that the numbers that you're having to handle, the caseload of all involved.
Yeah, some we work with far more intensely than others because they're in different parts of the system. But, you know, again, in terms of workloads, we have 4,500 children and young people with an education, health and care plan as well. So, you know, the numbers that the department are dealing with significant challenges, shall we say, you know, runs into almost 10,000. Which is a large number. Your third question was about the full report and whether it's shared with staff. We circulated the report to all staff with a congratulatory note. We've celebrated the outcome in a number of ways and on a number of occasions. The feedback we gave on the Friday afternoon when Kirstin, Anne and I did a webinar for staff was attended by 450 staff. So, you know, this is an event that people are really keen to hear the outcome of. And I think people have gained a real lift from the outcome of the inspection. The media coverage has been low key, but then I suppose good news isn't good news from a media point of view. And the only interview I did about the outcome was a piece that a particular journalist wanted to do, where there was a parent who was wanting to say that, well, it's all very well, services have improved, but my experience is still poor. So, you know, you can't win, can you? But nonetheless, you know, my response to that is that, well, we are a service that requires improvement to be good. That means that some people aren't still yet receiving a good service. And if there's one young person or family receiving a service that isn't yet good, that's one too many. So that's what I mean about we've travelled a long way, but we've still got some way to go. And I used that footballing analogy as it's half time, we're 2-0 up at half time, but the match isn't yet won quite. yeah, we have shared that report and celebrated that with staff, and they've got a real lift from it. The Ukrainian families provision is that we corporately have pulled a team together. Anne and Kirsten probably know a bit more about this than me because I think they're involved, but Kirsten's indicating, so I'll let her give you the detailed answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot going on around Ukrainian placement, but your question was specifically about access to language support. So particularly with the schools, what we are finding actually when these youngsters are being placed is that they actually do have, depending on their age, some level of English, but we have EAL provision within the schools that supports their language. And in fact, the entire Oak Academy online national curriculum delivery is auto-translate to Ukrainian. So in terms of being able to provide meaningful curriculum materials at the appropriate level for a child, the government has provided us with a really useful resource there. We're looking particularly at what provision we can put in place for post-16 in terms of the ESOL offer and a broader offer for those between 16 and 25 in terms of language skills and also access to additional education provision. But Garas, who supports all of our incoming refugee groups, Syrians, Afghans and Ukrainians, provide that initial language support. They have translators, they support with things like form completion, and there is a very detailed welcome pack that comes from GCC and across the other partner agencies, which has all of that kind of basic information in it that you're talking about around school access to public provision and so on, and host families have access to all of that as well. So there's been, whilst I wouldn't want to suggest that there is a completely smooth and seamless garment all around this, because we have had to respond very rapidly to national guidance that's come in relatively short timeframes to the arrival of Ukrainians. There's an awful lot of support and kind of joined up provision being made around ensuring that these guests have access to all the things that they need, and they have the communications skills provided or supported to be able to do so.
Thank you for that, because certainly I think it's a question that we as councillors are likely to be asked over the forthcoming weeks, and that gives me greater understanding.
We are going to provide a briefing for councillors around the Ukrainian situation, around things like school admissions and so on, so that hopefully you'll have, should we say, some more concrete information at your fingertips, because I would anticipate that you perhaps will be approached by constituents and host families with regard to the provision.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that, Kirsten. That's really helpful. I also look forward to that further briefing, which sounds like it's very much needed. Now I've got Barley and then no one else currently indicating. So unless there's anybody else, I will follow up with a question after Barley. But over to you, Barley.
Thank you. So it's kind of going back to the beginning. It was regarding the comment around care leavers being in unsafe or unsuitable accommodation. So one of my thoughts was I wondered what GCC classes as unsuitable or unsafe accommodation, as I feel like homes may be perceived as safe but don't feel safe to that young person. So what is that young person's personal perception of their safety and suitability in that area? An example of this could be that they are living near someone who abused them or caused them trauma. They don't feel safe going outside in the area they live, and this is impacting their mental health and progress in other like well-being interventions. Or they are near a family member, which is having a similar impact. So there are many reasons which might not be seen as significant, but they are significant and affect that young person's everyday life. So there are care leavers like me who have already obtained a home through GCC who would have not chose that home. And I feel it's not just a single comment, and it's reflective of how not all, but how some care leavers do feel about their accommodation. I just wanted to make a little comment there.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to respond to that? I don't. Presumably in delivery, we're working with the lower tier authorities as well on this, aren't we, Chris? So it's a partnership working.
I think it's one of those jobs that's never done, really, you know, because you're never satisfied about the quality of accommodation for our young people. There's always improvements to make, and it's always something that comes up in discussions between senior officers and their mentors, because I'm sure you know by now that Barley and others do mentor members of our senior leadership team. And one of the things that's raised on a regular basis is the quality and sufficiency of accommodation. Quite right, Andrew, you know, it's not something that we manage directly. So if we're going to improve, it's through influence of our colleagues in the district councils, all of whom, of course, have different policies towards social housing. Some maintain their own, some don't, some outsource it to arm's length organisations. So to get consistency across the county for our young people is quite difficult. But Eliza, who is one of my mentors, and I think one other young person is presenting to the district council's housing group, facilitated by Mark Bone, and presenting a range of issues to the district councils which they face in living arrangements. And that can be from aspects of quality, like, you know, are they in accommodation where there's damp, for example? Are they in blocks of flats where they feel unsafe? Are they individually placed in circumstances which aren't suitable? Right through to systemic issues like what happens if a care leaver wants to go on holiday for 6 months abroad? Well, at the moment, what happens is that unless they want to keep paying for that tenancy, they lose the tenancy. And of course, if a young person in a family chose to do that, then they would just leave the family home and return to it on their return to the country. Unfortunately, not all of our care leavers have that option. And so when they return, they find themselves at the bottom of the housing list without priority because they've given up a tenancy. Similarly, what about care leavers who go on to university? What do they do in the 3-month summer break when they come back, unless they keep on that tenancy while they're away at university? So there's a whole range of issues around accommodation, which, you know, I'm never satisfied with. And I don't doubt Barley at all when she says there must be, you know, more than one view. My comment was that Ofsted made that judgment on the basis of one view. They didn't ask more young people. Had they have done, they might have got a similar answer to the one that they got. I'm not saying that invalidates it in any way. Just that they based it on one bit of feedback, and also on previous occasions when they'd visited, they had said some very positive things about the quality of accommodation that the majority of care leavers find themselves in. So it's one of those areas where we've still got work to do. Barley and her colleagues quite right to remind us of that, and we're working hard to do it on a number of levels, because there's that housing operational group, there's also the housing strategic group, and there's the group of chief execs who I meet with, and at every level we're pushing accommodation as a key issue for care leavers. I don't know, Anne, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I think you've covered it. I mean, often care leavers are, you know, they're like the litmus test, really, aren't they, around our ability to respond to people who are vulnerable. And with regard to suitable housing, we're in a position in this country at the moment where we're facing some accommodation crisis. particularly in the area of social housing. So that notion of being able to offer choice, control, safety is not the way that our institutions currently administer housing, because it's delivered on a less eligibility basis, and is directed. And for our young people, that's not what we'd want for our children, is it? We would want our children to be able to exercise some choice and control over where they live, and to ensure that the place they live is safe. So we're already starting from kind of, you know, below the line. So it is, you know, it's a really good challenge that Barley brings to us, and it is something that, as politicians and as senior leaders, we absolutely have to advocate and continue to swim against the tide on, to ensure that we can deliver that for our children and young people to the best of our ability, and step aside, I think, or step beyond sometimes the social policy restrictions that our current administration places upon us, the way in which we currently administer housing across our local authorities. It's kind of what you've said, Chris.
Thanks. Well, we've got a smiley face from Bai, so we have no more hands indicating. I've a couple of questions myself, Chris. The first one is there's a children's summary for children's young people, which the Ofsted produced. How did that actually get distributed to young people in our care, and if so, what was the feedback for that? I mean, it's better having a kind of children's version, but if we just put it on the website, probably none of them are going to look at it. And the second question I wanted to pick up was the last of the bullet points in Ofsted's key summary, which is around the provision of IT. And I wondered, Chris, if you with and any of the other officers had started documenting instances and keeping a log of instances of where the IT hasn't worked as expected, and what the impact was, and also to look at where the software was working as it was supposed to, but there were gaps between what it was designed to do and what you actually needed it to do, and whether or not that had been captured formally and presented to council colleagues working in IT, both in the instance of faults and in the instance of functionality deficiency. So two very different questions, one on the com side and the second one on the IT side.
Yeah, okay, so if I take them in order, children's summary, that was circulated as part of the pack for this meeting to committee members. In terms of to what extent it's reached children and young people, at this moment, as I sit here, I'm uncertain, but we've asked Della to distribute it amongst ambassadors, Della Keith, that is, who is our link with the ambassador team. And I think, Anne, we're awaiting some suggestions back from ambassadors about how we do that, unless it's progressed further. But it's a good point, Andrew, and there's no point having a children's report unless we're going to distribute it and use it as a point for discussion. So that is our intention, but I'm not sure how far we've got with it.
I can find out. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Barley, so you go.
Yeah, I can find out. I don't personally know because I've been off the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I can go find out and feed it back.
Thank you. Thanks, Barley.
The intent was to send it out as hard copy to. I think that was where I last left off. But as Barley says, let's find out and get an update.
Hi, it's Becca, the other ambassador. Hello. I just wanted to pop in and say I'm not sure, but I've actually I'm doing an event this afternoon with our 16 plus forum. So if there's any questions actually, just out of the blue, that anyone would like us to ask the young people and get their opinions on, if you put it in chat, then that would be great. I can take that this afternoon and ask any questions that you guys can think of, anything really, and then I can ask them today.
Great.
Maybe.
Do you think there's a possibility of sharing the letter with the young people, Becca?
Yeah, no, that should be absolutely fine. I should be able to get that. I'll ask Hazel about it. And she should be able to like print it off and get copies possibly. Yeah. So I'll inquire about it with Hazel.
Okay. Okay. Look, Andrew, that's a good challenge, and clearly from our kind of response, there needs to be a proper comms plan, don't there? And so we'll pull one together to make certain that those young people in receipt of a service get some kind of opportunity to respond, react, and comment on the children's version of the report.
Yeah, that would be good.
In terms of the IT, this is going to be quite a technical answer, or I laugh because I'm not that agile around IT, but I can give you a kind of layman's version of what the problem is. And I alluded to it earlier when I raised this as one of the 5 recommendations that the Ofsted inspectors came up with. We have a very old IT infrastructure, and the systems that we operate in children's social care, and more widely, incidentally, across education in the council more broadly, sit on top of this old infrastructure. That infrastructure hasn't been very well maintained over recent years because the contract with Sopra Steria wasn't a successful one. It was coming to an end, and they maintained it really poorly in the knowledge that they weren't likely to be re-procured as our preferred provider. So there was a period towards the end of that contract before the current provider, Cantrium, was appointed. And what that means is that the infrastructure is old and you're using software. The software sits on top of that infrastructure. And if it's going to work effectively, the infrastructure facilitates that communication between the software and the infrastructure. If it's an old infrastructure and a new software package, they're not always compatible. You have to find workarounds. And that's generally the situation we find ourselves in Gloucestershire. And it, it doesn't matter whether you're children's social care, adult social care, or any other department for that matter. We also have quite an old version of Liquid Logic, which is our system for case management, or ICS as we called it. So we need to consider going forward to resolve this problem, either securing reassurance that corporately IT can provide a more stable system, and that is in some doubt, if I'm honest. Current rate of progress in patching the old system isn't facilitating rapid improvements in the end user experience, shall we call it, at the front line. And it's something that's reported widely in the inspection. It's still a source of frustration. It's still quoted in exit interviews as one of the reasons why people leave, because they spend an inordinate amount of time waiting to log on, they lose work, and occasionally they find it incredibly frustrating. Well, more than occasionally, I would say consistently. Most mornings I turn on my children's services WhatsApp, and there's always an exchange about how long have you been waiting to log on, or I've lost this, etc., etc. So rather than just bleating on about it, what I've been doing over recent months is looking at the possibility of Liquid Logic hosting the service rather than our own IT system. But this this is a decision corporately that we need to make, obviously with the full support of political and Pete Bungard's support as well, because you know, at the moment the IT arrangements are hosted corporately. But a number of local authorities, even if the IT is hosted corporately, do outsource, if you like, their children's services arrangements and have them hosted by Liquid Logic. Wiltshire is a good example, as is Norfolk and Suffolk, big counties who use Liquid Logic, our system, are hosted in the cloud by Liquid Logic. And I've had 2 meetings with them. They've done the costings for that, and they're going to do in the near future a health check, which will involve their staff coming in for 3 or 4 days, sitting with our frontline staff, experiencing end user experiences of the system and making suggestions for improvement and giving us advice on whether they think we should proceed with a hosted system or not. There's also a broader goal perhaps to be achieved, or a strategic advantage, in that adults are also implementing Liquid Logic at the moment. So there is the prospect of Liquid Logic hosting both services. So I'm not sure that that's the route we will go down. There's a lot of ifs and buts and support to be garnered around that view. But, you know, the IT system is a major barrier to improvement and has been. We've improved despite IT, not because of it. And IT should be a tool to facilitate practice, not create a barrier to its improvement. So that's a pretty stark view of the world in terms of IT and children's services, but it is a truthful one. And it's one, if you asked a frontline worker, they would repeat, and it would be repeated time and time and time again. So, as I say, there are some options. I know IT, corporate IT, are doing their best to improve the system by repatching the old infrastructure. But that in itself causes disruption. If they patch the system at the weekend, normally on a Monday, you can't get onto the system, or it's very slow, or it doesn't work because there's a bit of a ripple effect. You know, if you patch one part, it affects another. So it's difficult, but we've got solutions in mind. The lead member is aware of those, and considerations for future arrangements are underway.
Right, thanks for that, Chris. It's really useful. I'd heard about hosting. I wasn't sure if the hosting was going to be done on the cloud through Azure or AWS, or whether I didn't realize that it might actually have been hosted by Liquid Logic themselves. It does sound like that would be a major step forward. Is there anything else that members can do to expedite any of these issues?
I don't think so. It's just to be aware of it. I mean, the actual system is hosted by the parent company of Liquid Logic called System C, and System C is an NHS provider, so a big organisation, and they are currently responsible for delivering the national vaccination program. So they're pretty polished bunch, and pretty reputable. So I've got confidence that were they to host the service, we'd have a provider of high credibility, and one which is already doing it for I think it's about 13 or 14 of the other 150 local authorities, including one of our nearest neighbours, Wiltshire, who are a good service. You know, they run have been judged to be good by Ofsted. And Norfolk and Suffolk. Suffolk again has a positive inspection outcome. Norfolk not so.
Right, that's really helpful, and it sounds like you're taking the appropriate action here. Is that in the improvement plan? I can't remember off the top of my head if it's in the accelerated improvement plan or not. But
it's not in the accelerated improvement plan. There is a generic bit about tools of the trade, But this, because it's a specific recommendation of the Ofsted inspection report, will be in Anne's revised and refreshed continuous improvement plan. Okay. Right. I've now got a couple of hands. I've got Emma and then Mark would like to come in again. Can I, and towards the end of the meeting, I'm hoping that Stephen is going to come in. I think I've got a question that I'd like to ask him when he comes in as well. But if we can go to Emma now.
Thank you, Chair. And I just couldn't let this morning finish without acknowledging and echoing what others have said. This is a huge achievement to Chris and the team in getting this far and getting this positive report. As David Drew said, the 2017 report was a tree, and here we have just 12 pages. And I think Chris has just said something about Anne's new plan coming up. Of these 56 bullets, the vast majority are positive and encouraging, and there are obviously the inevitable some which say social work, supervision and support could be improved, and we need sensitive handling of letters and a few missed opportunities. So I'm guessing that a few of those sort of requires improvement still, will be in Anne's revamped action plan, and I'm guessing we'll pick up some of these in future meetings. That's really, I think, and also the other thing I wanted to pick up on was, Chris, you said you did the feedback with Anne and Kristen to over 450, I think you said, workers, and the impact that must have had on their morale going forward, and that will be able to be built on for them to be empowered, which is great for them to then deliver on Anne's rejigged and regenerated improvement plan going forward. So just a big thank you to everybody, and I suppose we'll be talking about some of this in future meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, we had a bit of a party online, really, on that day when we had staff online. It was a very positive experience. But Anne, do you want to say anything about the improvement plan going forward? Anything to add on what we've already said about our intentions?
No, I mean, you're exactly right, Emma. It is, it's the best of reports, but it's also the worst of reports in that in almost every area we have areas to improve, and essentially we across the piece we need to be able to consolidate what's good already, to broaden that, spread it to all areas for all children, and then to have a programme that accelerates our ambition, really, and so deepens and enhances what we do. And really that speaks to our opportunity now to be more confident in our practice, to step into innovation, and to really develop that practice model that Chris referenced earlier around systemic practice, and make sure we're as impactful as we can be. And if we were to, I think this is broadly where we are in terms of thinking about our improvement plan at the moment, but essentially all of the kind of more sort of granular actions sit under, delivery of timely, skilled interventions, eradicating drift and delay, and building those sustainable outcomes. And we can't do that without our partners, without our communities, without universal services, without our schools being really on board with us. So, our revision of that improvement and what our monitoring of that looks like is going to take, is a partnership piece across Gloucestershire. And welcome, absolutely welcome, and fully would expect your scrutiny of that and our progress.
Right. Thanks. And Mark.
Thank you. Bit of a political, a hot potato question. Chris, what is your views about your people, your team, continuing to work from home rather than bringing them back into the fold, and were they to return generally to their principal place of work, whether it be Shire Hall or somewhere else, as to whether you think that would actually improve the service that we offer?
Is that service offered specific to IT, Mark?
No, sorry, absolutely not. No, the service that you in the social welfare side of children and families. And so no, nothing to do with IT at all.
Okay. So general question about return to work. Well, there's a bit of a myth about social services working remotely. I mean, social services have been working face to face throughout the pandemic, and they've been doing in all but the very kind of depths of lockdown, face to face visits with children and families. And we were commended by the DFE for continuing to do that even during lockdown. And of course, there is something inherent about the nature of social work when you're dealing with highly volatile families, quite difficult to manage individuals, taking life-changing decisions about families in terms of whether they remain together or not. That's quite an emotional tug for anybody to manage. And so we've tried to maintain a presence in the office throughout lockdown. And there was, even in the depths of lockdown, a rota so that some teams could come in but be spread out and be safe, but have that opportunity to offload. I mean, it's very difficult, just to give you a scenario, of sitting on your settee with your own children, having to go out on a home visit and tell the parents that you're removing their child from their care, and then return home and sit back on the same sofa with your own children, you know, without some kind of debrief, without some kind of support and management sharing, if you like, of that quite difficult scenario. So I think on the children's social care side of the business, there's been a presence throughout lockdown, and that's growing. And I know more people are in the offices, and people have now returned to work. Not fully, they're not fully populated, because actually what the council has done in the interim is remove some of the facilities, i.e. desks. So if everybody were in at the same time, they'd have nowhere to sit. So we have had to adapt the way that we work, and the way that we've done it is through rotating teams so that they see their colleagues and friends on a regular basis, and they can offload and get this kind of support and supervision that they require for a highly emotional job. On the education side of the business, there has been more of a kind of absence from the office, and continues to be in many respects. And we have had some difficulty in getting people back to work to a degree, only in isolated cases, but in some cases working at home is almost become a right rather than a response, right, or a gift, I suppose is the right word, or an opportunity. But generally speaking, people on the education side of the business are returning to work and becoming more office-based. And I think, Kirsten, you're developing rotas for teams to be back in situ as well, aren't you?
I think one of the issues, Chris, was that there has been some mixed understanding of agile working and some mixed sense of tailoring of service, but we have made significant progress on that in even the last 2 or 3 weeks, with some strong leadership around the agile working. So we're all moving in the right direction now.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's some distance to go to get to where politicians require us to be corporately, but certainly our senior leadership team are clear that we want a presence in the office, and at least because we're here to serve business needs, aren't we? Not individual needs, but if any healthy organisation can deliver on organisational objectives while meeting individual needs, that's the definition of a healthy authorities or healthy organisation. So that's what we're aiming to do, to hit that new balance, which gives business efficiency, and but to do it within the context of meeting people's needs as best we can, because life has moved on, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and I can see that we've learnt things from the last couple of years that are probably going to be with us forever and actually are beneficial. But it's gratifying to know that there is that support there, because I think we as committee members are all aware of the emotional pressures which many of the care workers are under, and your very simple scenario put it in a very simple way. The contrasts of what you might be used to in your own home and 10 minutes away in another home is enormous, and have that support structure for the team is critical. I mean, like many of us sitting in on this, we've worked in a traditional way. You've got up in the morning, you've gone to work, and you've done your bit, and you go home. But when you are together as a team, you can bounce things off the wall. If you're bouncing it off the wall of this sort of single bedroom on the top of your house, month in, month out, that's incredibly difficult. And I personally don't believe you can get the best results. But this idea of hot desking, I mean, I think you only need to pick up the newspapers to see how big city institutions are now moving out of their West End offices or reducing the size of them, because working remotely can be all right, but you've got to nevertheless gather them in and have a sort of group hug and everybody to understand what everybody's thinking. Because what you can see in people's faces and their eyes, or the actual expression in their voice, tells us so much more than looking at yet another wretched email. So no, I think that's great. It's, as I say, I'm sure it's going to be different to how it used to be, but we are, after all, human beings, and we do interact. We do have relationships, and I think in the working environment, that's terribly important that support is there. So when you go out into a difficult position, you know that you've got that support immediately, either by picking up the telephone saying, "Help, what do I do? Things are kicking off here," or when you get back into the office, Joe, what do you think of this? So it's, looking after our personnel is as important as it is looking after the children and families. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mark.
Right. I've just been trying to WhatsApp Stephen Davis, see if I can get him on the call. I did want to raise the issue of whether or not the improvement board is going to continue. And that really is best coming from Stephen, but I don't know if you can give some hints as to current thinking, Chris.
Yeah, I can, Chair. I spoke to Stephen about this morning in my one-to-one, so I'm pretty clear about his current thinking. So yeah, I can fill you in on that. At the last meeting of the IB, the Improvement Board, we had quite a lengthy discussion about what the future shape of that board should be. And following that conversation, Clarice, who is the secretary to the board, if you like, wrote to all board members to ask for their views about the structure of the board, composition of it in terms of who should remain part of the new board. Well, first of all, I should say, one of the options is you just carry on, same old, same chair, same composition, same agenda around the accelerated improvement plan. But I think there was a very clear view that we should rebrand the board and refresh it to recognise the fact that we're out of intervention but that we still had some distance to travel to become a good service. So we've written asking people, does the board need to change? If so, what does it need to look like? How is it comprised? What would the partnership be? What would the membership be, rather? What partners should be involved? How often it should meet? What's the scope of the agenda? And whether we should have an independent chair or an in-house chair. So those are the questions that have been posed to board members. For what it's worth, you know, because it is a genuine consultation, I think Stephen and I are in a very, very similar place. We think in confidence that the chair needs to change to mark the new agenda. Andrew has been a very good chair. Andrew Ireland, who's our independent chair, has been great. He has done the job in Kent. He turned Kent around. His advice and support has been invaluable. But I think to mark and rebrand the new board, we need to mark the end of that particular era. So we'll be. My view is that we probably need a new chair. That chair could be an externally appointed person or internally, somebody like Steve Mawson. Steve Mawson has oversight of HR and IT, and so it's a good way of holding Steve's feet to the fire on the IT issues and HR issues and the corporate support generally for children's services. The DFE will be a part of that board going forward. As I say, we're still an authority in that category of required support and supervision, so the DFE will be part of that. Both our advisor and our link DFE improvement person, who is now somebody called Jen Cox. Our partners should be part of that because, and quite rightly alluded to earlier on in her presentation, that partners play an important part in getting to good. You know, it's not an endeavour that children's services can do alone. We need political and corporate support, but we also need the support of the other statutory partners like police and health. That's important to have them on board. So that's our thinking, and that perhaps we met quarterly. Ambassadors would still be an important part of that board. We'd want their live real-time views on the issues that the board are debating. And I think that covers it. I guess the issue for members is whether it's cross-party or not. You know, that's something for members really, and for our political masters to determine. There is the argument, I suppose, that opposition are represented within Scrutiny, and therefore the improvement board or continuous improvement board could be led by the, you know, or attended by the lead member and or the chair of Scrutiny. So I think you know, it's not for me to determine the political makeup, but I see Stephen's just arrived. But that's probably the trickier of all the questions, actually. Certainly for me to give an answer to.
Right, thanks. Stephen, you've arrived just at the right time. We was just talking about the improvement board. I don't know if you wanted just to add a few words to that.
No, and apologies for being late. I had another meeting, which on a planning issue. Actually, one David Drew will know well. We were talking about the Forest Green Stadium with the planning officers at SPRAG. So I don't know what you've been saying about the improvement board, but we are, as I'm sure Chris has explained, working out what the new format will be. But there's a couple of givens that I do want to assure everybody we're going to actually do. The first is we're going to have an improvement board. Second is that it's going to be multi-agency and that we will continue to include all of our partners involved in that. And thirdly, from my perspective, I think it should include cross-party representation because I think its purpose, it may have other functions that it achieves, but not least of which is to understand the improvement plan, which again, I assume Chris has updated you on, but we hope to have visibility of soon, and that we then track the progress of that improvement plan. And spinning off from that, if particular issues are raised at the improvement board, I would expect a deep dive into that. And I see that separate to what Scrutiny does, partly because the improvement board is not a public meeting, so Scrutiny has a role that is slightly different to the improvement board. But I also think Scrutiny has a somewhat wider remit in some areas, and it has the ability and has done that deeper dive into whatever it thinks is important. And I think that's a differentiation between the two boards.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I definitely agree about the relative focus and purpose of each of those boards. They are very different boards, and I'm pleased that we've confirmed that an improvement board will exist. It will be multi-agency, be cross-party, but in presumably some different form to the one that exists at the moment. And I think it's really helpful. I should say, Stephen, at the start, I did thank a number of people for having got us to the position where we are now with Ofsted, and that did include, of course, yourself and your predecessor, Richard Boyles. So I just want you to hear that from me as you've been able to join us just now. So
thank you for that, and I think it's important that we reference my predecessor, who I think put in the building blocks for this. I also members of the previous Scrutiny board, because we saw quite a turnover in that, and I know some of those were called out previously. I every time I haven't heard Chris's update on Ofsted this time around, but I have heard it several times before. I'm sure that you also extend your thanks to the staff who worked incredibly hard to get to where we got to, but also specifically during the Ofsted review, which is having now observed one is an incredible workload.
Yes, that's right. Yes, we did also to foster carers and the ambassadors and others who've helped with that. I wonder if I could propose that we write a note, or we ask DSU if they would write a note of thanks to Richard Boyles. Would everybody be in agreement with that? Just stick your hands up if you would. Yeah.
Okay, Andrew, I'll draft something with you, and then from the chair. Okay, no problem.
I think that's really important for Richard. Brilliant. I think we have had a very good session today. We haven't necessarily gone into things in huge amounts of depth, but I think we've covered a fairly comprehensive range of activities on this really most important subject. I can't see any more hands. So if there's nobody else wanting to speak, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and to say see you at the next regular meeting of Children and Family Overview and Scrutiny. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.